The Galactic Confederation Council was accustomed to spectacular presentations. In a universe that had already perfected weapons capable of incinerating entire moons, it took a particularly unique revelation to impress the assembled representatives of 17 species. Yet on this day, the only presentation item on the agenda was a baffling report about humans, those relatively new arrivals who still watched reality television while traveling between stars. Silence spread across the council chamber as the High Admiral concluded his briefing with a three-dimensional projection of yet another weapons malfunction log. No matter what race or advanced technology stood behind these quantum destabilization arrays, their systems consistently failed around human biological material. That was the conclusion no one seemed ready to accept. No one, that is, except the human representative. He leaned back in his swivel chair, balancing precariously on two legs, his posture an almost comical picture of ease amid beings who could fire antimatter torpedoes or telepathically interrogate an entire starship crew. The representatives of the Kion, the Velar, the Trias, and every other proud civilization perched quietly behind their respective stations. Each had cause to be alarmed. The malfunctioning weapons belonged to no single species. It was happening across the galaxy, and it was all tied to humans. The High Admiral's translator finished its last formal sentence, carefully rendering each nuance of the native language that otherwise sounded like glass shards scraping together. The Admiral's actual words, as best the translator approximated, were, "We do not understand how a species that discovered faster-than-light travel a mere 2 centuries ago is causing quantum-based weaponry to go offline simply by existing nearby. We demand an immediate investigation." The human representative gave a half-smile, tapping his fingertips together. "You realize how bizarre that sounds, right?" he said. "I almost wish I could say we planned it. But please go on. I love hearing about how apparently special we are." Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. Rumors about humans had circulated for years, but none of those rumors pointed to an advantage like this. Many suspected that the malfunctioning was nothing more than a systematic defect in the weapon designs. Yet every analysis by the Confederation's top engineers confirmed that the devices themselves were perfect until they encountered human blood or tissue. Then something inexplicable occurred, some resonance that caused the core quantum circuit to degrade temporarily. On the observation deck overlooking the chamber, Intelligence Director Zelb, a being of slender limbs and luminous skin, observed the debate with mounting apprehension. His species was renowned for pattern recognition, and the pattern here was deeply troubling. As the human representative fielded uneasy questions with smug deflections, Zelb's specialized neural implants hummed. A timeline was forming in his mind. Humans had unknowingly disrupted weaponry all across Confederation space, from the frontier stations to the capital. It was only a matter of time before someone, perhaps the hegemony, decided to exploit or counter this new phenomenon in a violent way. He tapped into his private communication link, instructing his second-in-command to expedite certain containment protocols. But the details in his consciousness blurred when the Grand Minister, a towering figure with opalescent scales that shimmered beneath integrated cybernetic plating, took the podium. The council members fell silent, and everyone, from the observation deck to the hall's furthest corners, recognized that the next words were critical. "Representatives," the Grand Minister began, "we have documented nearly 50 incidents, now 48 to be precise, in which proximity to human biological matter, specifically blood, resulted in catastrophic disruption of Class 7 or higher weapon systems. Our top researchers have excluded coincidences or technological faults. We must consider the possibility that human biology itself carries properties heretofore unknown in any other sentient species." All eyes turned to the human once again. He lifted his shoulders in a casual shrug. "Fascinating," he remarked. "Not sure if we should call that an accidental superpower or something else. But if it keeps us from getting vaporized, I'm all for it." At that moment, tension spiked. Certain delegates bristled at his nonchalance. Others carefully studied the data streams projected above the table, trying to see if there was any hint of sabotage. The admiral insisted that advanced quantum destabilization arrays did not just fail for no reason. The human's carefree half-grin remained, though if one looked closely, a flicker of curiosity glimmered in his gaze, as though he himself had only just realized a species might possess a bizarre advantage. That flicker of curiosity found an echo in a secure laboratory deep beneath the Confederation capital. Dr. Aravix, a xenobiologist with large black eyes and 4 delicate arms, was examining the latest set of blood samples shipped in from Earth. Arrays of instruments hummed gently. Spectrographic readouts lined the walls. The data made no sense. A heretofore unidentified protein was present in every sample from human donors, a protein that resonated in a quantum band associated with advanced weapon systems. That alone strained scientific credulity. But what baffled Dr. Aravix further was how consistent this protein was across all human ethnicities, lifestyles, and backgrounds. She believed in random variants. This phenomenon showed almost none. Her assistant, a younger researcher with greenish skin and a reedy voice, carefully ran a simulation. Dr. Aravix, he said, the new data confirms it. When we expose the human hemoglobin to a small-scale quantum destabilizer, the field collapses. This is an exact counterfrequency. Counterfrequency, Dr. Aravix repeated. She spoke slowly, each syllable draped in awe. That would imply design, not evolution. The chance that such a complex trait arises randomly is infinitesimal. Which begs the question, designed by whom? They stared together at the digital display, which plotted the genetic timeline of the anomaly. Preliminary analysis traced the relevant genetic sequence back more than 50,000 Earth years. That placed it squarely in humanity's distant prehistoric era. As far as the Confederation knew, no spacefaring species had even visited Earth at that time, let alone performed genetic engineering. Elsewhere on the capital world, in an unmarked intelligence facility, Director Zelb conferred with a group of watchers. They had tapped the same data. They knew the timeline, and they were already preparing for the worst. If humans were truly the carriers of some artificially engineered quantum disruptor, what would happen if an enemy like the hegemony harnessed it first? Their worry was not unfounded. In a region of space beyond Confederation scanners, the hegemony vessel Inevitable Dominance waited in cold silence. On her command deck, War Commander Vexok pored over intercepted transmissions. She was a tall, sinewy figure with battle membranes that quivered when she grew angry. Her weapons scientist presented the same improbable results that Dr. Aravix had discovered. The specifics made Vexok grit her teeth. Humans could disrupt the hegemony's entire arsenal if they ventured too close. But how? She hissed. How does this small, fragile race possess blood that neutralizes quantum technology? Her scientist offered a theory that it was a mere evolutionary fluke, something arising from Earth's peculiar radiation belts. Vexok remained unconvinced. A fluke? She repeated. Our entire civilization has refined quantum armaments for thousands of years, and these brash newcomers can simply turn them off with a paper cut? No, this is not happenstance. Prepare a specialized containment unit. I want a live human for dissection with minimal damage. Our engineers must replicate or neutralize this trait. As War Commander Vexok's teams prepared a stealth mission to capture a human subject, the Confederation Council's daily sessions grew more heated. Representatives demanded to know if Earth's government had hidden these capabilities. The human ambassador kept repeating that they had no clue about any genetic tampering, which was mostly true. But the Confederation's intelligence networks, always suspicious, refused to accept it at face value. Eventually, the Council assigned Dr. Aravix to lead a top-secret research project that would attempt to replicate the effect in a controlled environment. They had no illusions about their opponents. If the Confederation didn't figure out how to handle this new discovery, the hegemony certainly would. For the next several weeks, Dr. Aravix and her team worked around the clock, analyzing every corner of the human genetic code. They found references to the same pattern in certain ancient ruins scattered across different worlds, ruins that predated known interstellar travel. The glyphs in those places described a living shield. More cryptic still, they hinted at a dire cosmic threat yet to come. In the quiet hours of a night cycle, Dr. Aravix studied a partial translation from an archaeological site, references to a great darkness, an entity unstoppable by conventional means. She read the archaic words, "To end the cycle and prevent the devouring of light, we craft a shield in mortal blood. May it sing its defiance." The hair-like filaments on her arms quivered. Could it be that humans have been deliberately engineered by an unknown race, tens of thousands of years before their recorded history, in preparation for some future cosmic menace? Her speculation shifted from academic to urgent when the council abruptly summoned her. The Grand Minister's scales flashed in agitation as he explained that the hegemony was mobilizing a large fleet near a contested border. One of the Confederation's infiltration agents had reported that the hegemony's leadership suspected humanity's blood might be the key to unstoppable power. If they either harnessed or overcame the human disruptor trait, they would tip the balance in their favor across the galaxy. The Council needed immediate results. Some planned to protect humans and to secure that advantage for the Confederation. That same day, a research vessel called Empirical Truth sailed quietly away from the capital world, carrying Dr. Aravix, her assistant, and a human liaison officer. The official mission was routine compatibility testing, but in reality, they intended to gather deeper data about the protein's potential. The hope was that they could accelerate it or replicate it. The risk was that if the hegemony learned of their flight path, they would move to intercept. The human liaison on board was a tall, athletic man who went by the name of Russo. He had been assigned by Earth's fledgling diplomatic corps to keep an eye on the Confederation's experiments. Despite the secrecy swirling around him, he maintained a relaxed demeanor, chatting with the scientists about Earth's many eccentricities and occasionally helping them calibrate their lab equipment. He seemed utterly unaware of just how valuable or dangerous his blood might be to the galaxy's superpowers. Then again, perhaps that relaxed attitude was a mask. It was often noted that humans were adept at hiding tension behind casual banter. On the Empirical Truth, Dr. Aravix had Russo undergo a multitude of scans, taking blood and tissue samples that she exposed to a series of controlled quantum fields. She saw how each exposure subtly shifted the resonance of that protein, almost as if it were learning to neutralize new frequencies. By the end of the second week, she had the beginnings of a horrifying hypothesis. With enough exposure, this protein could adapt to counter not just standard quantum destabilization arrays, but nearly any advanced energy-based weapon in the known galaxy. Her assistant hovered beside her, trembling with excitement and fear. "But why, Doctor?" he asked. "Why craft such a perfect, adaptable countermeasure in this species? They were so primitive for most of their history." Dr. Aravix considered this question. "Maybe that's precisely why," she said softly. "They wouldn't discover their own advantage until it was needed. Or maybe the ones who engineered them just understood that humans, brash, curious, stubborn, would eventually expand and encounter the threat on their own terms." While that conversation unfolded, an ominous shape emerged from the darkness of space. A hegemony stealth vessel slipped into scanning range of the Empirical Truth. War Commander Vexok had grown impatient. If the rumors were true, humans carried within their veins the key to neutralizing quantum technology. Possibly they carried more secrets, perhaps a blueprint for a superior weapon. Vexok intended to acquire it by force. Under the faint glow of a distant star, the stealth vessel latched onto the Empirical Truth, cutting through the hull with specialized infiltration tools. Alarms blared. Russo, who had been half-dozing in the lab, jolted awake, and Dr. Aravix fumbled to seal off her data systems. The captain of the Empirical Truth, a gelatinous being with a calm, quavering voice, made an urgent announcement. Hegemony intruders detected in Sector 7. Security teams engaged. Husuvachid Dotor. Erevix's face go pale. They're here for me, aren't they? He asked. She nodded. They'll want your blood, or to capture you entirely. They can't afford to let you remain free if you disrupt their weapons. Down the corridors, the Empirical Truth security forces confronted the strike team. As predicted, advanced energy weapons malfunctioned whenever the intruders edged close to the pockets of air that carried microscopic traces of Russo's blood. But the hegemony had come prepared. They relied on ballistic firearms and monomolecular blades. Despite the environment of the starship, they fought with ruthless precision. The defenders, armed with quantum rifles that flickered and died at the worst moments, found themselves at a stark disadvantage. Hurriedly, Erevix and Russo sealed themselves in the lab. The walls of the module were reinforced. She initiated a lockdown, but the strike team had cutting tools that could slice through a battleship's hull. It was only a matter of time. The possibility of simply handing Russo over flickered in her mind, but she banished the thought. She had no desire to see the man torn apart as a specimen. More than that, she recognized that if the hegemony got hold of him, the entire balance of the galaxy might shift irreversibly. With a jolt, part of the bulkhead caved in, shards of metal scattering across the lab. The hiss of depressurization was minimal, quickly countered by emergency fields, but the four intruders in black armor stepped through, brandishing projectile rifles. Russo froze for an instant, though not in terror. His eyes scanned them. Erevix scrambled to conceal the data disk behind console. The lead commando gestured with the muzzle of his rifle. "Human, you will come with us," he demanded through a voice modulator that crackled with cold authority. Russo raised his hand slowly. "I'm not a huge fan of forced relocation," he replied. "Maybe we could talk about it." The commando's answer was a bullet that whizzed past Russo's ear, embedding itself in the laboratory wall. "Next one will be in your skull," warned the invader. "Surrender." Erevix's heart pounded. The intruders could kill her easily. She had no special advantage. Russo, however, had a particular quirk of evolution that might not just disrupt energy weapons, but that also gave him a surprisingly strong sense of self-preservation. And humans, she remembered reading, had developed a variety of formidable close combat skills during their long, violent history. Russo's lips tightened. "All right," he said quietly. "I know that bullet isn't going to vanish on account of my magic blood, but let's see how well you do if I get close." He lunged forward. The commando squeezed the trigger again, but Russo managed to twist aside, and the bullet plowed into a console, sending sparks flying. With startling speed, Russo grabbed a heavy sample tray from the table and hurled it at the second commando. The tray slammed into the woman's helmet, momentarily disorienting her. At the same time, he kicked the first commando's rifle away. A third hegemony soldier tried to fire, only to have the projectile jam. Perhaps a malfunction, or maybe the high adrenaline environment caused the infiltration gear to glitch. Whatever the reason, Russo seized the moment, delivering a blow that knocked the rifle aside. In seconds, the lab filled with the sounds of clattering weapons and short, sharp cries. Erevix crouched behind a console, her heart pounding. She had never imagined humans might be so physically formidable, especially in close quarters. But now she remembered references in various xenobiology texts. Earth's higher gravity and a long evolutionary history of conflict had produced robust musculature and reactive reflexes. When the chaos subsided, Russo stood over two unconscious intruders. One lay crumpled at the base of a shattered stasis tube. The last tried to aim a pistol at him, but Russo slammed the soldier's arm down, wresting the weapon away. He pressed the muzzle to the soldier's helmet, panting. "I really don't want to kill you," he said, "but I'm guessing you were about to carve me up. So how about we talk?" Erevix peered from behind the console, nearly speechless at the devastation. Even the specialized infiltration squad had been defeated. She realized that some of it was simply poor luck for the hegemony. They expected to rely on advanced weaponry, only to have it fail near Russo's biology. but part was purely human tenacity and skill. Before they could finish interrogating the last commando, the ship's alarm system informed them that the rest of the hegemony infiltration team had been cut off by the Empirical Truth security detail. The intruders retreated, leaving behind their injured. Russo, still shaking from the fight, reached down to help Dr. Aravix to her feet. That, she said, still breathing hard, was completely unexpected. He let out a shaky laugh. Not for me, apparently. Good job sealing the lab. Sorry about the mess. She glanced around, her instruments shattered and half the consoles offline. I've got data backups. That's what matters. And you. Her gaze settled on him. Now we know you can handle yourself, but the stakes are only getting higher. Did you notice how your presence shorted out their backup energy guns as well? Russo nodded, expression grim. I saw. I guess it's not just a rumor that my blood does weird things to fancy weapons. She eyed him carefully. It's more than that. This entire phenomenon might be the reason you exist in the first place. There's a deeper pattern we're uncovering, something that ties your species to an ancient threat. I suspect the hegemony want to exploit it for their own gain. The Confederation is trying to protect you, but also, let's be honest, they want to harness it too. He let out a sigh. We're just pawns in some cosmic game. Huh. Potentially. She tried to sound reassuring, but her voice trembled. We have more important concerns than petty warfare. We think something called the Harvester is coming, an entity that devours energy-based civilizations. And your species, with that protein, might be the only shield. From that day forward, every major player in the galaxy raced to unravel the secrets of human blood. Hegemony leaders planned further raids. The Confederation accelerated its containment efforts, quietly placing humans in secured facilities or granting them special escorts. Earth's own government found itself inundated with official letters from both allies and enemies. Alarmed by the swirl of attention, they demanded explanations that no one could fully provide. Then new data arrived from distant star systems on the outer rim. Entire outposts went dark, their energy sources extinguished. Long-range telescopes captured glimpses of a deep shadow that swallowed any ship approaching it. The name Harvester appeared again, scrawled in half-deciphered transmissions. It was no myth. It was a cosmic reality creeping ever closer. In a final, desperate set of negotiations, the Confederation convinced the human leadership that the only way to stand against the Harvester was to push the disruptor protein to its final stage of evolution. The old ruins indicated that if the protein adapted fully, it wouldn't simply disable standard weapons. It would disable the Harvester's ability to feed on quantum fields. Yet no one knew what effect that might have on other advanced technology in the meantime. The process could theoretically knock out the entire Confederation fleet as well, leaving them vulnerable to the hegemony or other opportunists. Despite the risks, Earth agreed. Humankind was not about to let a cosmic predator devour known space. The plan was straightforward in theory. Place a large number of human volunteers in specialized labs, subject them to carefully modulated quantum energy akin to the Harvester's known signature, and let the protein adapt. Once it reached the threshold, they would place these volunteers on specialized ships that would face the Harvester head-on. In practice, it was a logistical and ethical nightmare. Thousands of people had to undergo rigorous testing, uncertain if they would survive or if the adaptation would turn them into something unrecognizable. Russo himself participated, arriving alongside Dr. Aravix. She coordinated the scientific portion of the plan, calibrating quantum emitters to mimic the Harvester's rumored frequency. The data that rolled and shocked even her. The protein was evolving with alarming speed. She saw entire segments of a human genetic code shift in real time. If ancient architects had planned this, they had done so with a precision unmatched by any known civilization. She worried that if it continued, humans might inadvertently neutralize all quantum-based technology for months or years. But time was running out. Ships along the outer rim reported that the Harvester was accelerating, possibly drawn by the bursts of energy used in the attempted countermeasures. Soon, it would reach the heavily populated sectors. Millions of lives would be at stake, and that was only the beginning. If the Harvester gained enough power, it could breach the core worlds and eventually reduce the galaxy to an entropic husk. In a move that shocked many observers, the hegemony signaled a truce with the Confederation, at least temporarily. Even War Commander Vexok recognized the futility of fighting each other if a cosmic parasite would soon devour them all. She met with the Grand Minister and the human ambassador in an uneasy alliance, pledging her warships to stand alongside the Confederation fleet in the final confrontation with the Harvester. Of course, no one truly believed the hegemony would remain cooperative once the threat ended. But better a precarious alliance now than certain destruction. 3 weeks later, hundreds of ships, Confederation cruisers, hegemony dreadnoughts, and a handful of newly refitted vessels designated for human volunteers assembled near a battered star system on the frontier. The plan was to lure the Harvester to this location, away from the densest civilian populations. The moment the shadowy mass arrived, the combined fleets would lock it down with high-energy confinement fields. Then the human vessels would drive into the heart of the entity's quantum vacuum, projecting the newly adapted protein resonance to starve it. If it worked, the Harvester would crumble. If it failed, the invaders would only strengthen the entity by feeding it more energy. Dr. Aravix stood on the command deck of the newly commissioned starship Aegis Terra, named to honor Earth's surprising role as the galaxy's shield. Russo was beside her, wearing a haptic interface that constantly monitored his vital signs. Over 1,000 humans were on board, each with specialized suits that connected them to the resonance amplifier. Together, they formed a literal wave of biologically generated quantum disruption. The tension on the ship was palpable. Everyone knew that if this didn't stop the Harvester, there was no fallback plan. Signal from the outer perimeter announced the communications officer. The Harvester is here. On the main display, a swirling darkness emerged from the cosmic void, an amorphous shape that flickered between states of existence. Some watchers saw a roiling mass of black tendrils. Others saw shimmering negative space. All attempts to scan it with normal instruments failed. The only constant was that the advanced warships at the forward line lost power in seconds as the Harvester latched onto their quantum cores. War Commander Vexok's image flashed on the screen, her voice wavering with uncharacteristic fear as she barked orders to her massive dreadnought. Even the mighty reactors of the hegemony's flagship began to sputter. If the plan hadn't been prearranged, the entire flotilla would already be doomed. At a signal from Dr. Aravix, the volunteer-laden Aegis Terra advanced. Despite decades of training in spaceflight, Russo's breath hitched in his throat at the sheer magnitude of that darkness. The Harvester dwarfed everything else, a cosmic predator that thrived on the spark of advanced civilizations. Activate the resonance field, Dr. Aravix said. Her assistants keyed the controls, and a hum spread through the hull. Each of the 1,000 human volunteers felt an electric tingle in their veins. Inside them, the carefully primed protein responded, generating a low-level quantum interference pattern. Amplifiers broadcast that interference outward. Almost at once, the Harvester writhed, tendrils recoiling like startled serpents. Areas that had latched onto the fleets flickered and loosened. On the command deck, Dr. Aravix studied her readouts, excitement building. They were pushing it back. Her screen showed that the mass at the Harvester's core was collapsing, unable to feed. The entity tried to adjust, seeking new ways to siphon energy, but the protein had become a dynamic disruptor that adapted faster than the Harvester could shift frequencies. Throughout the combined fleets, cheers erupted over open channels. Some soldiers who had resigned themselves to certain doom began to hope. But then the price of the proteins might became apparent. All advanced quantum technology in the vicinity, including the starship's reactors, life support, and defensive systems, began to flicker. The same broadcast that blocked the Harvester's feeding also hampered everything else. Lights dimmed. Engines sputtered. Vessels across the field drifted, inert. A cosmic silence took hold, punctuated by the ragged breathing of those who watched their instruments fail. On the Aegis Terra, Dr. Aravix realized with a jolt that they were on a countdown clock. If the Harvester was not fully neutralized soon, the entire fleet would be left adrift and vulnerable. The Harvester might still adapt again, or the ships might be too enfeebled to flee if some new danger arose. Sweat trickled down Russo's forehead. He felt the resonance deep in his bones. The 1,000 humans were effectively merging their biological signals, strengthening the disruption. It was working. The Harvester's central mass started to split apart, scattering into 1,000 fractal pieces that churned in chaotic confusion. The cosmic predator was starving, shrinking, retreating from the signals it could not defeat. As minutes passed, it became clear that the Harvester was in full collapse. But the humans were not unscathed. Their suits beeped warnings of neural overload and organ stress. A few collapsed. The synergy of the resonance threatened to overload their biological systems. Dr. Aravix frantically tried to modulate the amplitude. If they turned it down too soon, the Harvester might recover. If they kept it up, some of the volunteers might die. Meanwhile, the entire battle group drifted powerless, spinning in the darkness like children's toys. Still, the creature writhed. With a final convulsion, it withdrew its tendrils and disintegrated in a fractal dust that sparkled briefly, then faded into the void. The Harvester was gone, or so it seemed. Over the next several heartbeats, the star lanes fell silent. The combined forces of the Confederation and the hegemony remained afloat in dead ships, physically intact but functionally powerless. One by one, the advanced engines sparked back online. Without the Harvester's siphoning presence, the quantum field stabilized. Dr. Aravix breathed a shaky sigh of relief. She listened to the comm channels fill with cautious celebration. The Harvester had either been destroyed or forced into an inert state. All that remained was to gather the wounded and assess the damage. Over the next hours, engineers and medics worked tirelessly. On the Aegis Terra, a good portion of the human volunteers needed immediate medical care for extreme fatigue or strain on their organs. A handful had to be placed in stasis for advanced treatments. Russo himself emerged mostly unscathed, but the ordeal left him with an unsettling realization of how drastically his species had been manipulated millennia ago. He gazed at his own hands, wondering what other secrets might lie dormant in humanity's DNA. Outside, the once dreaded dreadnought of War Commander Vexok limped away from the confrontation, its systems battered by the Harvester and partially by the very resonance that had saved it. Whispers spread that the hegemony was furious at having been forced to rely on humans. They had intended to subjugate or exploit Earth's advantage, yet ended up seeking the very salvation they had scorned. An uneasy ceasefire reigned. No one expected it to last forever, but the collective memory of the Harvester's power might restrain open hostilities for a while. When the battered fleets returned to Confederation space, crowds hailed the human volunteers as heroes. In a massive ceremony overshadowed by lingering political unease, the Grand Minister declared humanity an essential part of the Confederation's strategic defense. At the same time, voices across the galaxy questioned whether Earth would now become a militaristic superpower. After all, if the human protein could neutralize any advanced weapon, the entire order of galactic politics had been upended. Questions that had once been whispered now flew across media channels. Who engineered the human race? Were they still watching from some hidden vantage in the cosmos? Did the Harvester's defeat signal the end of that ancient threat, or was it merely the first step in a much bigger challenge? Some suspected that the ones who manipulated human DNA had also known about even greater dangers lurking in the cosmic tapestry. Perhaps the Harvester was only a precursor to something else entirely. For Russo and the other humans, life changed overnight. Before, they were a curiosity, a species known for reality shows and an inexplicable knack for trouble. Now they were the guardians of a secret coded within their biology, a secret that might make them the ultimate deterrent or the ultimate target. Agencies within the Confederation that once dismissed humans as amateurs clamored to recruit them. Diplomatic envoys sought alliances. Even the remains of the hegemony infiltration squads tried to operate behind the scenes, hoping to replicate that disruptor protein. Earth itself struggled with the sudden surge in recognition. Having stepped fully onto the interstellar stage, the planet no longer had the luxury of isolation. Countries on Earth formed new global accords to handle the influx of ambassadors, requests for blood samples, and the complicated ethics of distributing a biology that could crash entire fleets. Debates raged about sovereignty. Some argued that the protein should be withheld to prevent another arms race. Others felt that only by sharing it could a stable peace be maintained. No conclusion seemed satisfactory. All the while, Dr. Aravix continued her research, sometimes in conjunction with Earth's top scientists, trying to unravel more of the cryptic message from the ancient ruins. She found additional references to the final configuration, an evolutionary stage that overcame not just quantum-based weapons, but something else, a cosmic shift of unimaginable proportions. The texts were incomplete. She sensed that the Harvester conflict was only the tip of an immense iceberg. Perhaps, given enough time, humanity's engineered trait would continue to grow, eventually transforming them from mere disruptors to something akin to cosmic shepherds. That possibility both excited and terrified her. One evening, Russo visited her lab. He was wearing a simple jumpsuit, no elaborate diplomatic regalia, no ceremonial medals. He eyed the swirling data displayed on the screens. She saw how tired he looked. A single question hovered between them. Where do we go from here? We keep searching, Dr. Aravix said at last. We keep asking why your species was chosen. We find out if these ancient engineers are out there, or if they left more clues. Because I have a feeling the galaxy's not done throwing cosmic threats at us. Russo nodded slowly. It's almost funny, he murmured. We grew up hearing stories about alien invasions, about us being so fragile compared to everyone else with their lasers and warp drives. Then we show up in the cosmic community and discover we're carrying the biggest trump card of all. She gave a half-laugh. Yes, the irony is cosmic indeed. The question is whether that card is a blessing or a curse. He didn't have an easy answer. Instead, he turned to gaze out the viewport, where the stars stretched endlessly. Beyond them, hidden in the infinite black, were presumably countless other wonders and dangers. And somewhere, perhaps, the architects of humanity's improbable genetics still watched, waiting to see if their living shield would fulfill its purpose. As the corridors of the research station emptied for the night, Russo headed back to his quarters, the lights flickering softly around him. He felt the slow, rhythmic pulse in his veins, aware that it wasn't just pumping oxygen anymore. It carried the echoes of an ancient design, laid down 50,000 years ago for reasons he could only begin to guess at. Tomorrow, the galaxy would keep spinning, with new challenges, new diplomatic crises, new skirmishes. But something fundamental had changed. Humanity was no longer the naive newcomer. They were keepers of a code that made the mightiest weapons power down and had just saved the galaxy from an unstoppable horror. Even so, not every civilization would welcome that shift in power. He paused outside his bunk, closing his eyes as a wave of exhaustion hit him. Dr. Aravix was right. There were more secrets to be uncovered, more threats lurking in the cosmic darkness. If the Harvester was real, then so, perhaps, were other nightmares that civilization had only whispered about in ancient myths. He took a deep breath, exhaled, and stepped inside. One small step, he thought wryly, for a man whose blood was apparently 1 in a trillion. He quietly wondered if his earliest ancestors could have ever fathomed this destiny. Throughout the next months, pockets of tension flared. Certain fringe groups wanted to forcibly extract large quantities of human blood to weaponize it. Others contended that humans must be quarantined so they could not destabilize existing power structures. Meanwhile, Earth's government found itself forging new partnerships in every direction. The Confederation set up specialized committees to ensure that the human advantage did not become a catalyst for an arms race. The hegemony withdrew to their own territory, licking their wounds and rethinking strategies. Rumors suggested that War Commander Vexox still harbored ambitions to subdue humanity or replicate the protein trait artificially. But overshadowing all these political maneuvers was a newfound awareness of the cosmic scale of danger that could lurk at the edges of known space. Once a civilization encountered a threat like the Harvester, it became impossible to cling to petty rivalries with quite the same zeal as before. The galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief, yet also peered warily into the unknown. Many asked themselves, if some ancient benefactors had genetically forged humanity as a defensive measure, what else might they have created? And what other threats had they foreseen? Every now and again, Dr. Aravix and Russo met in the quiet of her lab or in a corner of the starbase observation deck, looking out at a swirling nebula, sharing new fragments of data. They discovered references to multiple cycles of destruction. The Harvester was apparently just one iteration. At some point in the ancient past, entire swathes of the galaxy had been extinguished by cosmic phenomena that modern science still struggled to explain. She believed that the genetic code in humans was designed to adapt not only to quantum-based weaponry, but eventually to further extremes of cosmic hazards. Perhaps that was the final configuration. Perhaps it was waiting for a trigger that might not arrive for centuries or millennia. Russo admitted that such revelations weighed heavily on him. "We're just people," he said. "We have families, favorite sports teams, silly obsessions with reality TV. To think that inside all of us is some cosmic doomsday protection, that's a lot to handle." She reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I know, but for better or worse, you're not alone. Your entire species carries that burden. And maybe that's why you'll be able to handle it. Because it belongs to all of you, not just to one chosen hero." On Earth, more citizens became aware of the stories swirling out in space. For the first time, humankind truly recognized that their biology had saved billions of lives scattered across alien worlds. A wave of reflection swept across the planet. Some found pride, others found fear. Religious movements interpreted the revelation in myriad ways. Scientific communities and philanthropic organizations launched new initiatives, demanding full involvement in any discussions about the blood code. Diplomatic ties that had once been shaky took on new urgency. A cosmic perspective was dawning, and beyond Earth, the galaxy watched with a mixture of awe and anxiety. The Confederation's official stance declared humans to be critical guardians of cosmic stability. But not every species agreed with that assessment. Some ambassadors whispered that placing so much trust in one young, brash species was a recipe for disaster. If humans decided to turn their disruptive trait into an offensive weapon, what recourse would the rest of the galaxy have? Nevertheless, history had shifted course. The Harvester was no more. The dreaded expansions of the hegemony had been slowed. Humans were recognized as equals, or perhaps more than equals, in a realm they had only begun to explore. Many of them, like Russo, simply wanted to go home and see family, to watch something mundane on a screen, to do the normal things humans did. Yet the galaxy had changed. They had changed, whether they wanted it or not. Late one evening, Dr. Aravix typed up her final reports for the Confederation Council. She explained, in as much detail as she could, how the synergy of human blood had collapsed the Harvester. She recommended continued study and suggested that the Council establish new protocols for responsible use of humanity's unique biology. That last recommendation, she suspected, would be the hardest to enforce. The galaxy's history was rife with conflicts over advanced technology and resources. A living disruptor would be no exception. She concluded her report by quoting from an ancient inscription, "We shape the mortal vessel so it may shape tomorrow." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. No single race should bear the weight of an ancient prophecy. Yet that was precisely what the humans had inherited. Her final statement in the report was simple. The code within human blood is both a promise and a warning, a key that unlocks the path to survival and perhaps to ruin, depending on how it is wielded. In the days that followed, the Council's reaction was predictably mixed. Some hailed the humans as cosmic saviors, wanting to grant them permanent seats and additional voting power. Others insisted on deep regulatory measures. Whichever route the council eventually took, the fact remained. The harvester was gone, and the once laughable species of Earth had proven themselves. Their code had made the mightiest weapons power down, and it had dissolved a threat that could have ended them all. Somewhere out in the star-dappled expanse, hidden watchers might have observed the outcome with satisfaction. Perhaps, long ago, they had seeded Earth's population with a perfect quantum disruptor, gambling that at the right moment, it would activate to defend the galaxy. If so, they had succeeded. But the question that lingered, the question that echoed in the corridors of starships and in the hearts of curious minds, was why these watchers hadn't stepped forward. If they had shaped humanity to be the galaxy's shield, what further darkness lay in wait? The ruins suggested more mysteries, more cycles of cosmic destruction, and more reasons to fear. The story, as it stood, ended with guarded hope. Civilians from across dozens of star systems wrote to Earth, expressing thanks for the cosmic rescue. The name human no longer conjured an image of naive explorers. Now, it evoked respect and a bit of trepidation. The everyday reality show still ran on Earth, of course, but overshadowed by this new cosmic dimension. The present threat had passed, yet everyone sensed there were bigger storms on the horizon. Russo, at last, found a moment to catch his breath. He stood on a balcony of the newly rebuilt Confederation Tower, gazing out over a vast cityscape that glowed with alien architecture and commerce. Starships darted overhead, weaving in meticulously plotted lanes. Light from a foreign sun glinted off towering spires of glassy metal. This was no tourist scene. It was the nexus of a galaxy where humanity had unexpectedly claimed a seat at the highest table. Behind him, Dr. Aravix approached, footsteps light. "We're going back to the lab," she said. "A few more tests on volunteer samples. We want to confirm that their protein levels are stabilizing now that the harvester is gone. It might give us more insight." He turned and gave a faint smile. "I'll help. I owe you for saving my life. And I'd like to know if we're done mutating for the time being." She laughed softly. "I think you'll be fine. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if your species is done evolving. At least until the next cosmic crisis." They stood there for a moment, letting that truth settle. In time, they would walk back inside, dealing with the politics, the research, the responsibilities placed upon them. For now, they shared a quiet kinship, brought together by curiosity, by necessity, by improbable fate. Neither could shake the sense that, as significant as this victory against the harvester was, it was merely a prelude to a greater destiny. The code within human blood had made the galaxy's mightiest weapons shut down, and perhaps it would one day shut down an even greater threat. In that sense, humankind had become a living lock, waiting for a key, or perhaps waiting for the next wave of cosmic calamity to test them again. For the moment, though, the city glimmered, the stars beckoned, and a tenuous peace reigned. That in itself was a worthy cause for gratitude. And so they lingered on the balcony, letting the swirl of lights and traffic soothe their nerves. If the ancient watchers truly were observing from some hidden vantage across space and time, they had every reason to be satisfied. Their living shield had stirred to life, deflected an apocalypse, and emerged with strength enough to face what might come next. The universe, with its ironic sense of humor, had entrusted its fate to the very beings who once believed themselves powerless. As Dr. Aravix and Russo left the balcony, the final glow of sunset on the horizon whispered that the galaxy's future rested in hands both vulnerable and immeasurably potent. None could say what challenges lay ahead, but one fact was indisputable. Humanity carried in its veins a code that could shut down even the deadliest alien weapons. And that code had also, albeit briefly, saved them all from an ancient cosmic devourer. What that meant for tomorrow was uncertain. But as so often in the story of civilization, the darkest threats sometimes yielded the most unlikely defenders. And so the humans would go on, forging alliances, exploring the stars, and occasionally still indulging in that perplexing form of entertainment called reality TV, secure in the knowledge that for better or worse, they were the universal outliers whose very blood contained the power to save worlds.